We are live. I am going to wait for attendees to come in before I start. Just a little less than a minute because I know that people were waiting in the waiting room already.
All right, great.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Be Waste Wise. Yeah, I can see we've had a few attendees come in already. Welcome to Be Waste Wise. I am Shweta Dandapani. I'm one of the community builders at Be Waste Wise. I will tell a little bit about Be Waste Wise first and then introduce our speakers today. Be Waste Wise is a nonprofit organization addressing the need for knowledge dissemination in waste management. We try to bring the best minds in the world together and build a global waste management community. If you have been following our work, you know that we organize at least two webinars every month with a wide range of moderators and speakers. And in fact, our audience, which is you, come from 123 countries. So thank you so much for the continued support. I will be dropping a few links in the chat. One is that we're doing a survey right now for our community, for our audience. So your responses will be helpful. And the other is if you continue to see value in our work, please consider donating to us. I will drop both the links on chat. And now moving on to today's webinar. The title for today's webinar is From Waste to Value, a system-based assessment of Indonesia's plastics value chain. We have Eleni Yakivido who's from Brunei University, London. We also have Lula Jerasamido from the same university. They have both worked on a paper, and the webinar is based on these papers. And Mike Webster, who's also contributed to it. He's a Project Stop Program Director at Systemic. He is going to moderate this conversation. We are going to have a presentation. We're also going to have some conversations, and your questions will be answered live. So please use the Q&A section for your questions. And that's it from my end. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Sweta. So just before we get in, well, just before Lula and Eleni really get into the kind of the nuts and the bolts of this, this is, in deeply unacademic terms and appealing to a waste manager like me, essentially it's a massive overview of what's going on in Indonesia, all of things in terms of plastic waste. So it has this kind of really, I really urge you to have a look at the paper. It's an absolute it's chock full of gems and nuggets of information, really valuable insights about everything that you ever thought you wanted to know about plastic waste or didn't even know. Everything from plastic flows, recyclability, production infrastructure, collection systems, government roles, regulatory frameworks, supply demand, consumer preferences, everything. So, it's rare that you get an opportunity to really see something that, I don't know, looks at so many different aspects of plastic waste. So before I go on too much about it, I'm going to be quiet and hand over to Lula and Eleni, who are going to talk you through the methodology they use. So really, it's a very, very robust, very comprehensive approach, and then talk about all of these levels of information, which from me personally, I found fascinating to kind of really think about plastic waste in quite a new way. So over to you.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome everyone to our webinar. I'm now going to share my screen where I will guide you through our approach. So the presentation is around waste to value, a systems-based assessment of Indonesia's plastic value chain using the CVORR approach. CVORR stands for Complex Value Optimization for Resource Recovery. To get us started, 11.5 million tons of plastic waste is generated every year in Indonesia, of which 5.6 million tons entered the environment in 2020 with ongoing inputs annually. This is a key finding from our PISES project policy report published in 2025, which shows the staggering reality around the plastics value chain. There is a problem. However, the problem is not just a waste-related problem. It's a systems problem. There are many efforts to reduce plastic pollution in Indonesia, But the issue is that these are fragmented and uncoordinated, and therefore they tend to focus on end-of-pipe solutions instead of looking at the big picture. So what's needed? Really, it's needed a good understanding of the existing practices, the roles, the challenges across the production, use, and end-of-life management to establish a coordinated system-wide action across stakeholders and sectors. How can we gain such understanding? That's exactly where the CVORR comes into the picture. Because CVORR is a systems-based decision framework and analytical toolkit, which is designed specifically to turn circularity from an ambition into something that actually works in practice. Its core, it does one thing. It helps us to address global challenges through a systemic view. How does this? Through three ways. By adopting a systemic view, looking at everything that happens in the system in order to understand systems behavior and identify solutions that are viable and feasible in practice. Second, it identifies inefficiencies and key leverage points and then evaluates these through 4 value domains: the environmental, the economic, the social, and the technical domains. And third, it prevents creating false circularity. It actually looks what works in the real world context and helps design strategies that are not just theoretically sound, but actually impactful. Now, this is the CVORR framework. I know it looks quite a lot happening in there, but it's a structured, stepwise approach that helps to uncover all of the systemic realities that one needs to incorporate into an analysis. It's made of 3 key components: the core, which is the baseline analytical tool; the intermediary, which links the baseline analytical tool with the final stage, which is the complex value flow analytical tool. Now, the intermediary stage, it models the system, if you like, and then it helps us to identify where interventions are needed. Most importantly, it helps us to develop metrics. And if you notice the plus in the final step of CVORR, it indicates that this stage can be applied only if data is available, data that respond to the metrics with which you can assess the sustainability of interventions. Therefore, the metrics, which carries out in step number 7, helps you to really understand what data is needed in order to evaluate your interventions. Our presentation today focuses on the baseline analytical tool and how it was applied to understand system behavior, which aligns with 5 key enabling conditions: material selection, product design and impacts on ecosystems; waste, the management of waste, or resources if you like, and the value chain realities; the policy and regulatory context; the market demand and incentives for circularity, for sustainability, for change ultimately; and the user behavior and practices that underpin whatever happens in the system and the way the system is run. I'm now going to hand over to Lula to guide you through the findings of our work.
Thank you, Eleni, and hello everyone from my side. So before moving into the results, I'll very briefly explain what the baseline analysis of CVORR Plus does. It helps us to understand the system, what flows through it, who is involved and why, and under what constraints decisions are made. The core idea of CVORR Plus is that the system is made up of parts that are interconnected, so changes in one part may affect the others. And this means that we don't look the plastic pollution in isolation, we get a whole system overview. And to do this, our baseline analysis is based on 3 building blocks. The processes, that includes the mass and money flows, as well as the interactions and feedback; the structures, that involve stakeholders, their networks and power dynamics; and also the values that reflect the norms, behaviors, activities, and drivers behind the decisions. Next slide, please. So the first step is to define our system and its purpose. Our system was the plastics value chain, including materials, components, and products in Indonesia. But it's also important to understand why we analyze the system. We had three main objectives. First, to understand the flows in Indonesia, including materials, money, and decisions. Secondly, to identify the root causes of plastic pollution, considering not only the visible waste, but also the inefficiencies and socioeconomic implications behind it. And finally, find opportunities for improvement through better policies, design, and stakeholder engagement, supporting the National Action Plan to reduce marine debris by 70% by 2025. Next slide, please. So we haven't looked at everything randomly. We set clear boundaries, and the step 2 of CVORR is about defining system boundaries that are based on three dimensions. First, geographically. We looked the plastics value chain in Indonesia at national level, but we also zoom in on Banyuwangi in East Java, which was the case study of our project, to capture local dynamics within the broader system. Secondly, we have temporal boundaries. We focus on current system conditions using data from the last decade to understand ongoing challenges and transition opportunities. And the third are contextual boundaries that involve governance and socioeconomic conditions shaping the system. So we need to get an understanding of what are the contextual factors in the system before starting the analysis. Next slide, please. The next step is where we map what moves through the system. We have two types of flows. We have mass flows, including material, components, products, and waste, of course, plastic. And second is the money, including costs, revenues, and payments. Both types of flows are important because mass flows help us to understand what happens in the system, and money help us to answer why this happens. So by analyzing both flows, we can understand where value is created, where is lost, and where the system breaks down. Next slide, please. And moving into the results now, here we can see the flows, mass and monetary flows, from production to consumption in the Indonesian plastics value chain, and this is the upstream part of the system. As we see the map from left to right, we see that the plastics enter the system through domestic production and imports in the form of resins and end up in the retail wholesale sector where they are finally purchased by consumers. What's important here is that, first, plastics come from both domestic production and imports, which means that the system is globally connected. Secondly, fast-moving consumer goods, also known as FMCGs, and packaging dominate plastic use, and this is the stage where a great share of value is generated. FMCGs operate on high volumes and fast turnover, and even though individual plastics are of low cost, the total value that is circulating at this stage is very high. And thirdly, also important, is that high volumes of plastics are placed on the market and quickly become waste. What does this mean? That the system was designed to generate waste. Next slide, please. And this is the downstream part of the system, from consumption to management. As Eleni mentioned earlier, we have 11.6 million tons of waste generation. And from these, large amounts remain uncollected and mismanaged through open burning, littering, dumping, leaking into the environment. This corresponds to around 60 to 70% of total plastic waste generation. This is huge. A second finding is that municipal systems are dealing with huge volumes of waste, but at the same time remain underfunded, so they are not able to deal with these volumes. Thirdly, the informal sector plays a key role in recycling. If we see the flows, we'll see that they contribute up to 90% of recycling. This means that the recycling system in the country almost exclusively based on the informal sector. a sector that is not formally integrated in the system, and that creates inefficiencies and social inequities. And finally, recycling depends on material value. So high-value plastics, such as rigid plastics, are recovered, but low-value plastics, such as sachets, who are prevalent in the market, are left unmanaged, and they leak into the environment. So what we see, if we compare upstream with downstream, is that upstream we have high volumes of products and high value generation, while downstream we have huge volumes of waste and very limited financial resources to manage the waste. So there is a power imbalance, a structural barrier. Next slide, please. We saw the flows, but the flows are shaped by humans. So, and these are, the humans are those who affect the operation of the system. They shape the system. So it's important to see the human side of the system. We need to understand that materials, components, and products don't flow on their own. Every flow, every decision, every leakage point is shaped by companies, organizations, users, service providers, regulators. This means that in order to design meaningful and effective intervention, we need to understand who is involved, how they influence their decisions, who creates or reduces impacts, and how their power, knowledge, incentives, and responsibilities are shaped within the system. Next slide, please. So in step 4, we map and analyze stakeholders. The first step that we did is to identify who are the stakeholders who are involved. Firstly, we use the stakeholder theory. Based on this theory, we have two types of stakeholders. We have the internal stakeholders who are directly involved in the flows, are those who are involved in the production, in the consumption, in waste management. And the external stakeholders who are not physically involved, but they influence the system through their actions. So in the form of regulatory authority, financing, social expectations, advocacy, knowledge. So if we see the figure on the right, we can see how they are positioned in the system. We have the internal stakeholders at the center, like producers, consumers, employees, suppliers, retailers, who are involved in the production, consumption, and management. And around the internal stakeholders, we have several types of organizations like government agencies, NGOs, external businesses, media, who shape the conditions. Next slide, please. So here we can see the map of internal stakeholders. In this map, it's important to see not only who is involved, but also how they are linked. It's like holding their hands, and what happens in one part affects the other. So, for example, we can see the active role of informal sector, who is depicted by the yellow boxes downstream. We can see how they are linked to recyclers, along with the formal sector, which is the blue boxes. And we can see that recyclers are the stakeholders downstream that are linked to stakeholders upstream. Next slide, please. And here we have the list of external stakeholders. What happens with external stakeholders is that the landscape is more complex and more widespread, and it would be very challenging to look at national level. So what we decided is to analyze external stakeholders in Banyuwangi, first to capture the local dynamics, as we said before, but also to see their role in a more tangible and active way. So we identified 111 external stakeholders that are involved in the plastic system in Banyuwangi. And we grouped them based on 11 categories according to their legal status. We have government agencies, community organizations, trade associations, research and financial institutions, and other types of organizations. We will not provide a map for external stakeholders because it would be overwhelming. So we decided to keep the list and see who are the external stakeholders. Next slide, please. When we analyze stakeholders, it's very important to clarify their roles. what are their actions, what decisions do they influence, and what responsibilities they hold. This will help us to understand their accountability, their relationships, and interactions. Next slide, please. And in this table, we can see a summary of the key stakeholders who are involved in the system, including both internal and external. And here we can see what they do, along with their decision power and responsibility. So what we see in this table is that stakeholders upstream, manufacturers, and FMCGs have a significant influence, a strong decision power on material selection, product design, packaging design. So this means that they shape what enters in the system. So they have high decision power. Then we have the retailers and wholesalers who have a power in product sourcing and supplier selection, but still this depends on market demand and decisions upstream. We also have the consumers who have a power on consumption and disposal behavior, but still this is limited on what is available and accessible to them. And when we go downstream to the waste management, we see a more concentrated responsibility. We see that the formal waste sector, including community sorting facilities, disposal facilities, as well as the waste banks, also known as Bank Sampag, who are a semi-formal structure at community level that does waste sorting and supported by the government, we see that they have a very high responsibility for managing waste and their impacts, while their power is mainly operational and limited to infrastructure constraints, financing, and decisions upstream as well. Next slide, please. And this is a continuation of the table where we see also the informal sector, who plays a great role in recovering material, high-value plastics, basically. Still, their power is very limited because it is not a recognized sector. We have the recyclers, who have a strong power in material recovery, but still their action depends on what enters the system and the available infrastructure as well. Regarding the external stakeholders, a key is the government, who has a strong power regarding regulation and coordination, but this must be translated in effective implementation, and this is a high responsibility. And finally, we have different types of organizations, non-profit, community, NGOs, external businesses, who influence the system mostly through engagement and advocacy rather than direct control. Next slide, please. In addition to this analysis, it's important to further clarify their power by analyzing the power dynamics. Who can influence others? Who is being influenced? How their roles and interactions change over time? And what are the drivers behind these dynamics? Therefore, we define the level of power that refers to the ability to shape decisions in the form of authority, knowledge, social influence, and also the interest as the willingness to use this power. Next slide, please. So in order to analyze the power dynamics, we use as a tool the Mendelov matrix that uses the power and the interest that we defined previously in order to position the stakeholders into 4 categories. We have those with high power and high interest, who should be managed closely because they combine influence with active engagement. We have those with high power but low interest, and they should be kept satisfied because they have high power. We have those with high interest but low power and should be kept informed because they have an active involvement in the system, but still their influence is limited. And finally, we have those with low power and low interest and are of low priority. Next slide, please. And here we can see the application of the Mendelov matrix for the Indonesian stakeholders, including both external and internal. Let's start with the external stakeholders. Well, we define their position in the Mendelov matrix according to their priorities and activities. We also consider their spatial level, whether it is at national, international, or local level. And also, we try to see the stage of the value chain where they operate. Is it upstream, downstream, or across the entire system? In simple terms, external stakeholders with high interest are those who prioritize environmental issues such as plastic pollution, while external stakeholders with high power are those with political influence in the form of regulatory authority, finance capacity, or organizational leverage. So what we see, we have many key players, stakeholders that combine high power and high interest. These are government bodies, NGOs, financial institutions, media. So we see a diverse stakeholder categories that are involved as key players. Stakeholders with high power but low interest are mainly government agencies and financial institutions that may not prioritize plastics. And we have many stakeholders with high interest but limited power, including mainly local stakeholders such as community organizations, NGOs, research institutions like us, who are actively involved, but their power is limited. And finally, we have some trade associations upstream that are of low priority due to their narrow focus. And now let's see the internal stakeholders and their power dynamics. Here the pattern is different. All internal stakeholders have high interest, and this is because they are directly involved in the system and any change may affect them. However, they have different levels of power. The most powerful internal stakeholders are FMCGs and plastic industry, as we saw from the table previously, because they shape what enters the system. However, also plastic industry has high power, follows after the FMCGs and plastic industry, and because it shapes what the material recovery, but still it has more limited power. And all the other stakeholders like traders, retailers, consumers, waste collectors have limited power because their activities depend on what is happening upstream and on market conditions. And an interesting part is about the local government, which has a hybrid role. It's both internal and external stakeholder. It's external because there are local government agencies that have a legal authority and may affect the system, but also we have government agencies that are involved in the waste collection and sorting. So as internal stakeholder, the local government in Indonesia has a power that lies somewhere in the middle. This is because on the one hand, it has legal authority, but on the other hand, its power is constrained by financial limitations and its dependence on higher level of governance. So now I'm giving the word to Eleni to further explain you the enabling conditions of the system. Eleni, you are muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I was trying to find the right key. Thank you so much, Lula. That was excellent. Yes, the enabling conditions. This is actually what helps us to underpin all of the previous outputs because we mapped the mass, we mapped the monetary flows, the stakeholders. We understood and tried to understand as best as possible the roles, the priorities, the interests, and the power, which then leads us to the need to see, okay, so we've got that. What's next? How do this fit in the system? How does it translate into what we see and observe in that particular system? And that's exactly where the 5 levels of information come into the picture. Because these 5 levels help us to understand why things happen the way they do and what are the inefficiencies that occur in the system. So they underpin the flows and those who are involved, and that helps us to reveal the system behavior. They help to uncover the interdependencies, the feedback mechanisms, the structural barriers, which we call logins. highlighting what hinders or promotes systemic change, and it informs the subsequent identification of system variables. Now, this is important because it lays the groundwork for the intermediary stage, where we are mapping the variables through system dynamics modeling in order to identify key leverage points. Now, I'll guide you through each of the 5 levels of information. And I'm going to start with the first level of information, which is the natural environment and provisioning services. The key highlight: we need to urgently look at the root causes of plastic pollution and leakage in the environment. Now, currently, there is a high use of low-value plastics in the system. Now, these, combined with the uneven service provision, the inadequate collection, and the short-term infrastructure fixes, leads to degradation of ecosystems because of the plastic pollution, which then in turn affects the livelihoods of people relying on the environment. So to unlock value creation, there's a need to prioritize the protection of ecosystems in order to improve public health and strengthen community resilience. And this requires shifting attention upstream in order to reduce unnecessary and unavoidable, or avoidable, if you like, single-use packaging, to scale up reuse and refill systems, and to see how we can improve the efficiency of systems downstream by investing in collection and safe disposal in order to create further value. In the second level of information, in the technologies, infrastructure, and innovation level, the key highlight is that plastics value is trapped due to a structurally imbalanced system. So what happens here? Upstream, we have the power concentration that you've heard from Lula earlier, which drives a lot of production, if you like, in the amounts of plastics, especially the problematic, the low value plastics. And this power imbalance reflects into downstream effects because we have the lack of investment. And therefore, we also have seen infrastructural logins, which in the midstream, they reinforce the weak collection, the weak enforcement in terms of collecting insights, if you like, from what needs to change, which helps to prevent the leakage of plastics, which is what we call behavioral logins. So how can we unlock value in this level? We need to prioritize investments that look into collection and management of the plastics that are generated, but also in looking at how to make the system work. And that includes improving collection coverage, enabling blended finance and improved waste collection systems, creating stable demand and viable business models, and supporting technologies suited to low value and flexible plastics. Creating a stable secondary material demand and flows is important for creating reliable and viable recycling markets and supply chains. And that's exactly where the key issues arise, because like Lula mentioned, we have a very high active informal recycling sector responsible for 90% of the high value plastics that are recovered in the system, but these are not supported well enough in order to help address and bridge, if you like, the challenges that are seen between the technologies, infrastructure, and innovation level and the way that this sector operates within Indonesia. And that's exactly where the third level comes into the picture, into the bigger perspective, the governance, regulatory, and political landscape, which needs to find ways to bridge those gaps, address these challenges. Because the policies exist, Indonesia wants to make the right thing. They have the policies in place, but they're lacking in terms of implementation. Currently, what we have observed, there is decentralized governance, there is limited local capacity. So the local government cannot do enough in order to address all of the challenges that relate to the plastic leakage and pollution. And in other areas, they are stressed as well. So it's something that needs to be incorporated. We've got weak enforcement of the law and fragmented coordination, which reduces the policy effectiveness as well as the investors' confidence in order to build the infrastructures that are needed to provide the collection services. So how do we unlock value here? The priority is not more policy, but better delivery of the policies that already exist. There's need to align national and local action, to strengthen enforcement and monitoring, to create clear and credible investment frameworks that can deliver the impact that is needed, that can slowly and gradually bring the change. There are many efforts to create a strong and robust extended producer responsibility, but at the moment these are not delivering the right outputs because there is a large of single-use packages that are of low value. And therefore, how can the expanded producer responsibility, the EPR, work if there is not enough recovery of high-value plastics? And of course, the formal recognition and integration of the informal recycling sector is one of the key priorities because, as mentioned earlier, they are contributing a lot to the system in terms of recovering value. That leads us to the fourth level of information. How do the businesses and the market operate in the system, and how do these lead to the value recovery? On the one hand, we have the dominance of cheap, flexible packaging serving the interest of the most powerful. And these have no recovery value. So yes, the informal recycling sector recovers a lot of the high value plastics that exist in the system in order to divert them for recycling. But all of the low value plastics remain in the environment. And this leads to environmental and social pressures. The informal recycling sector is under-supported and it's exposed to vulnerabilities. And the lack of recognition doesn't help them to recover also some of the low-value plastics. So it doesn't enable the system to organize them and leverage the huge value that they offer in this system. And on the downstream end, we have volatile material prices and unclear policy signals, leaving the downstream stakeholders, the recycling industry, also exposed to a lot of changes and vulnerabilities. So what unlocks value in this level is to redesign products and delivery models, to invest in traceability and transparency in supply chains and value chains, especially those that link the recyclers with the upstream players, and improve the working conditions for the informal recycling sector to make them feel empowered enough and give them the means to start collecting also the low value plastics that are leaked into the environment. There is a need to support material recovery infrastructure, so collection services need to be spread out, and these need to be aligned with facilities that can sort and then promote the recycling or reuse or better management options, which are depending on the local context. And these need to align with the policy direction, both of the national and local governments. Because circularity will not scale unless business models are viable, feasible, and compatible with the local realities. And in Indonesia, we've seen that every part has its own local realities which need to be taken into account for something productive and effective to actually be implemented. Finally, the fifth level of information, that's where we have the user behavior and the household practices. Now we have to say that here the choices of the consumers are limited. They have constrained choices. And it's not just that people are not aware of what they are doing in the environment. So it's not the problem, the behavior of the consumers, but the choices that they are given. Sachets remain popular, yes, because they are affordable and accessible, but there are also other means. Well, there is also a lack of waste collection services, management of waste capabilities. There is, in some cases, low awareness as to the issues created by the leakage and open burning activities. But there's also weak incentives to reinforce better practices. And that's exactly where all of the stakeholders need to come together to help address these issues collectively. So what unlocks value? Behavior change in the entire system, in all of the stakeholders that are involved in the system. Viable alternatives are also needed. Accessible, reuse, and refillable systems, because these can be implemented properly and they can deliver very good results if only they have the space for this to become stabilized and further institutionalized into the Indonesian context. Of course, new practices might be needed, and we are in the lookout for new opportunities to bring change in the way that plastics are used in that system in order to enable the transition. Education, incentives, community engagement can also help to accelerate the change in the system. So what's the pathway forward? Change is not going to come overnight. Change is gradual. So we need a number of different interventions across the different levels of information that I've presented earlier. And together, these interventions, they will create the reinforcing effects that will gradually bring the change that we need to see. Better collection and segregation will slowly lead to better quality material flows, and that will create better trust for investment and innovation to become possible, which in turn will lead to stronger markets and circular solutions. And then it will by itself instigate behavior change and community adoption and reduce leakage of problematic plastics in the environment, leading to the creation of value that will generate economic, environmental, technical, and social benefits for the communities as well as the stakeholders operating across the system. Crucially, the transition is not just about end-of-pipe solutions or technologies. It's about bringing people together. It's about coordination. It's about creating the right level of trust so all of the things can come together, all of the threads can come together in order to leverage the human capacity within the local communities, empowering and embracing the informal sector and the excellent work that they do, building a resilient and inclusive circular economy, which will serve everyone that is involved in the system. So in a nutshell, if we were to look at this together, reducing pollution at the source by phasing out problematic plastics is key and a very good starting point. In the technologies, we need to fix collection. We need to start collecting and helping people see that collection is important, so segregation at the source, collection, so that the infrastructure can then be further developed to manage and unlock the value that is embedded in the plastic packaging waste or plastic waste if we're looking at the overall. That will enable better material flows and will make use of the massive recycling infrastructure that Indonesia currently has. At the governance level, it's about delivery, not necessarily design. Some redesign and reforms might be needed, but the most important thing is to turn policy into action. And that is tied in together with the businesses and the way that the market works. We need to provide the right means for the different players, both upstream and downstream of the system, to find ways to work together and bridge the massive gaps that exist in the way in the system and the way that the system operates in terms of recovering value from plastics, even the high value plastics. At the end, human behavior needs and practices. We need to make the sustainable choice the easiest choice for the consumers, or provide the means so that the choice doesn't create an additional burden to them. So to conclude, there is no one-size-fits-all solution to diverse realities and governance challenges, but there is one thing that we are pretty certain about. Solutions need to be context-specific, and the implementation of solutions should be based on a systemic understanding of how the system is run, how the system behaves, in order to be able to see where coordination can happen across the production, the use, the management stages, and how to unlock value. Because at the end of the day, is a systemic issue, and therefore it's an issue that involves all of us. And we all need to take accountability in the way that we consume, we use materials, components, and products in our system, and how we dispose and determine the way that these are managed. And with that, I would like to end the presentation. I will stop sharing the screen and we can engage into a discussion. Thank you very much for attending. And if you have any questions or would like to link with us further, we're happy to hear from you. Thank you.
Eleni and Lula, really, really interesting. Thank you so much. And I can see Lula, you've been busy away answering lots of those questions. There's just one I'm going to take, facilitator's privilege and just ask a question that I'm interested in before having someone else. But I mean, what was the single biggest misconception around plastic waste systems you think that this paper challenges? Was there something that you think everyone kind of feels like they know, but then once you had like this really, thorough, holistic look, was there something that you thought, okay, actually, that's not the case? What was the big thing that jumped out at you?
I can start with that, Mike. Thank you. I think that there was a misconception that Indonesia doesn't have the infrastructure to deal with recycled plastics. And that's a massive misconception, because Indonesia has a very good recycling infrastructure. And if you consider that a lot of developed countries are shipping their plastic waste to Indonesia for management, maybe this is telling. Maybe that can damage the misconception that people may have. And therefore, because it has the infrastructure, they can, by providing collection and sorting facilities, to really leverage huge value from the plastics that they generate. The problem, however, is that the massive proportion of the plastic waste that Indonesia generates is low value and problematic plastics. And it's not the high value that the recyclers would prioritize in order to generate recycled content for substituting some of the virgin material in the system.
Interesting, thank you. And I mean, I'm just going to follow up, and I can see, Lila, that you kind of answered. There were a few questions around the integration of the informal sector, given its importance, and given that essentially you could argue in many ways that it's the most functional part of the whole system at the moment. how do we, what can be done to, help them recycle more, help them perhaps start looking at these low value plastics that Elaine has just been talking about?
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for the question, because I think this is very important. We saw from our analysis that the informal sector has a very active role. We found estimations around 3 million tons of informal workers and around 110-15,000 junk shops. However, their activities are not well documented, and there are several concerns about forced labor and exploitation. So this that is important to be addressed is firstly from policy aspect to be recognized about their involvement and potentially be involved in frameworks that are related to material recovery, such as CPR regulation. At the same time, it's important to improve their working conditions, provide a safe environment, stable income, and maybe social protection. And the third, also important and let's say more practical aspect, is that they should be integrated into the formal system in a more realistic way by supporting partnerships, because informal sectors, they really know what they do. They have a very good understanding of the flows, especially of money flows, which is very important of how the system operates. So they can recover capacity gaps that exist in the formal sector, and they should be given access to infrastructure and training. But it's important to say that they should not be replaced, but they should be recognized and integrated, because now the system works well in the informal sector. They do a very good job. So this hasn't to be changed. It has to be improved, protected, and integrated with a smooth way.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to just follow up. There's a question from Isabel as well, and I'm just going to ask that and just expand on it slightly. Eleni, you were talking about some of this kind of imported material, suggesting that indeed there is an infrastructure there. As far as you're aware, first of all, do you know has it in your kind of awareness, has there been much impact in Indonesia on this the temporary ban in non-OECD countries, I guess, of exports of plastic waste? Do you think it's, I'd kind of be interested on your broader reflections. Do you think, how does this importation of material kind of impact on the broader plastic waste ecosystem, and were it to stop, might there be any impacts elsewhere, within the kind of the domestic system?
That's a complex question by itself.
Sorry, lots of bits and pieces on it.
A lot of pieces on it. I'm gonna start with the fact that the capacity is there, so why stopping it? I mean, if the capacity is there and they are supporting to some extent some of the upstream industry, then it shouldn't be removed. However, if some of the low value plastic packages, if you like, because this is the key and mostly consume plastic stream, if it changes from flexible sachet base to rigid, or better design, if you like, that would help the improved recovery of this, and the industry could start taking better quality of plastic waste from within. Maybe that would create or will start creating a better way for them to start looking as to how to keep their facility going. So
it's
a matter
interesting.
of supply and demand, but the supply can become from different ends, and it depends also on the quality. So it's not just about securing supply, it's also about the supply being at the quality needed for creating something of value.
It's interesting because from as you're suggesting, actually, this imported material might be supporting a broader infrastructure which can have benefits domestically, and that is a bit of a turnaround, on the kind of narrative that we often hear, for instance, in Europe saying it's exporting its waste. I think it's got to be remembered that, this material is actually purchased by local reprocessors. So it's, there's as much of a pull as a push.
Exactly.
And finally, you're both obviously from it's just disappeared, that question, but there was, you're both from obviously a higher education institution yourself. There was a question there about, what can be done, and it's disappeared, but what can be done around, what's the role of institutions like your own and those within Indonesia in, pushing everything from, changing materials to better research to helping, Indonesian decision makers make better decisions around waste and plastic waste.
Yeah, Mike disappeared because I've already answered this question. Is what we see is that the integration between small scale and research is that we will be able to provide solutions that are that address local realities, and this is very important. Researchers can provide technical knowledge and provide solutions in theory about their recyclability, alternative models that might work, while manufacturers can bring this advice into practice. And together this can co-develop suitable solutions about packaging, alternative products, test innovations, and see the real conditions. And this can improve in practice what works and start introducing effective interventions.
Yes, and if I may add to what Lula said, I think that the PISAS project is an excellent example of what institutions both in the UK and in Indonesia can do together if they join forces. And I think that we demonstrated in the real world terms what's feasible to happen by the introduction of by first engaging with all of the stakeholders in the system, or a good number of them, and discussing with them about interventions, how to bring change in the system, and introducing that change in a real world context through our pilot, with which we replaced flexible plastic packages with alternatives such as rigid plastic refillable containers. And we've seen how the community really liked that idea and embraced our efforts so much that we reintroduced the pilot, which it ran in 2024 with very successful outcomes. We reintroduced it in February 2026 with our partners that operate in Indonesia, Alner and Enview. And it's through small changes that we can gradually bring the bigger change. But this cannot be done only by a few, but it's something that has to be done by many of the stakeholders in the system. And I think that's something that we need to keep communicating.
Wise words there, I think. I can see we're nearly at the hour. So Lula, and Eleni, thank you so much for sharing all of that knowledge. I know through having worked with you guys on the PISAS program, it's been an amazing kind of mix of academic and real kind of frontline experience. So really interesting. Please do take a look at that paper. Sweta, back to you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Eleni, and thank you, Lula. I think most of the questions from the audience have been answered. I have also dropped all the three speakers' LinkedIn profiles on chat, so you could connect with them on LinkedIn if you have further questions. And this webinar, the recording of the webinar will go up on our website and on our YouTube channel in 2 weeks. I've dropped the link to the website for whoever wants to have a look at it. And you can also see other webinars that Mike has been part of on our website. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.